For a contract to be considered legally valid and enforceable, it must contain a few essential elements, starting with an offer and an acceptance. One party must offer to perform a specific service, and the other party must officially accept those exact terms without modification. Furthermore, there must be consideration, which is the legal term for exchanging something of value, usually meaning the owner pays money in exchange for the contractor's labor and materials. The most frequently tested contracting concept on the CCP exam is risk allocation. Risk allocation determines which party will absorb the financial impact if materials get more expensive, labor becomes scarce, or the schedule is delayed. Cost engineers use different types of contracts to strategically shift these financial risks either toward the owner or toward the contractor, depending on how well the project scope is defined. The first major contract type you must know is the firm fixed price contract, also known as a lump sum contract. In a lump sum contract, the contractor agrees to perform all the work for one specific, unchanging total price. Exam questions will expect you to know that this contract type places the maximum financial risk squarely on the contractor, because if they miscalculate their estimate, they must pay for the overrun out of their own pocket. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the cost reimbursable contract, sometimes called the cost-plus contract. In this arrangement, the owner agrees to pay the contractor for all actual allowable costs incurred on the job, plus a predefined fee for their profit. You must remember for the exam that cost reimbursable contracts place the maximum financial risk on the project owner, making them highly suitable for projects where the initial scope is vague or completely undefined. Another common arrangement is the time and materials contract, which acts as a hybrid between fixed price and cost reimbursable models. Here, the contractor is paid a fixed hourly rate for labor and is reimbursed for the actual cost of materials used. Because this can easily lead to an open-ended budget, exam scenarios will often remind you that time and materials contracts should always include a strict not-to-exceed clause to protect the owner from infinite spending. You will also encounter the unit price contract, which is incredibly popular in heavy civil engineering and highway construction. In a unit price contract, the contractor bids a fixed price for a single unit of work, like 1 cubic yard of excavated dirt, but the total final price depends on the actual quantities measured in the field. This contract type beautifully shares the risk, as the contractor takes the risk on the unit price, but the owner takes the risk on the final volume of work required. To manage these agreements, cost engineers rely on a package of contract documents, which typically includes the formal agreement, physical drawings, technical specifications, and general conditions. Because construction is complex, these documents can sometimes contradict each other, which is why contracts include an order of precedence clause. This clause tells everyone exactly which document overrules the others if a conflict arises, ensuring that disputes over technical requirements can be settled quickly and objectively. No matter how perfect your contract documents are, every single project will experience changes during execution. Change management is the formal process of identifying, documenting, and approving modifications to the original project scope, schedule, or budget. On the certification exam, you must remember that no extra work should ever be performed in the field until a formal change order is signed and fully approved by the project owner. When dealing with changes, the exam will test your ability to differentiate between a directed change and a constructive change. A directed change occurs when the owner explicitly orders the contractor to perform extra work or alter the original plan. A constructive change, however, happens when the owner's actions or inactions force the contractor to perform extra work, even though a formal verbal or written order was never officially given. Whenever a change order is approved, it directly impacts the project baselines that we discussed in earlier sections. The cost engineer must formally update the original cost baseline and schedule baseline to reflect the newly added work and funding. If you fail to update the baseline after a major scope change, your earned value management calculations will instantly become inaccurate and your project performance metrics will be completely ruined. Unfortunately, owners and contractors do not always agree on the cost or necessity of a change, which leads to a formalized disagreement known as a claim. A claim is a legally binding request by the contractor for additional time or money that the owner has officially rejected. Exam scenarios often position cost engineers as the primary analysts who must review historical project records, schedules, and estimates to determine if a contractor's claim is mathematically and factually justified. When a claim cannot be resolved at the project level, parties will turn to alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, to avoid going to a long and expensive court trial. The two main forms of ADR tested on the exam are mediation, where a neutral third party helps negotiate a compromise, and arbitration, where a neutral third party acts like a private judge and makes a binding final decision. The exam expects you to know that the construction industry strongly prefers ADR because traditional litigation is incredibly slow and financially destructive. Working with large contracts, expensive claims, and significant sums of money requires cost engineers to act with absolute integrity. This brings us to the AACE Code of Ethics, which provides the moral and professional framework for how you must conduct yourself in the industry. The certification exam will present you with situational questions to ensure you can apply these ethical standards directly to difficult, real-world project scenarios. One of the most important ethical standards you will be tested on is handling conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest occurs when your personal or financial interests could potentially influence your professional judgment on a project. The exam rule is incredibly simple and strict, stating that you must always disclose any potential conflict of interest to your employer or client immediately, allowing them to decide how to proceed. Another critical pillar of the Code of Ethics is the standard of competence, which states that you must only perform services in areas where you are genuinely qualified. If a client asks you to perform a highly complex quantitative schedule risk analysis and you have no training in that specific area, ethics dictate that you must decline the task or explicitly inform the client of your limitations. On the exam, never pretend to have expertise that you do not possess. You must also maintain absolute objectivity and truthfulness in your professional reporting, which is a major responsibility for any cost engineer. For example, if your earned value calculations show that a massive project is falling drastically behind schedule and bleeding money, you must report those factual findings to management exactly as they are. Altering data, hiding bad news, or manipulating performance indices to make a project manager look good is a severe violation of professional ethics. When answering ethics questions on the CCP exam, always ask yourself which choice represents the most transparent, honest, and objective course of action. Do not accept bribes, do not steal intellectual property from previous employers, do not falsify estimates, and always protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. If you apply common sense and prioritize unwavering honesty, you will successfully navigate the ethical scenarios presented on your certification test. Congratulations on completing this final section on project execution, contracting, and professional ethics. You have now covered the complete blueprint for your exam, and I encourage you to complete the attached practice test one last time to test your overall knowledge. Working through practice questions improves your retention and guarantees that your exam readiness is exactly where it needs to be. The practice test is included with this lesson to ensure your active learning continues, so jump into those questions now and seamlessly transition into taking your official certification exam with absolute confidence.